Hello everybody and welcome back to another review of IMDb's Top 50 Greatest Films of All Time. I know that it's been a while, I've been busy doing stuff and haven't had time to record any reviews or really watch any movies. I have, however, finished Season 2 of Daredevil at long last. That came out, I think, last March or April, and I just got around to finishing it this past weekend, and that was very good. Daredevil is becoming one of my favorite shows that is airing currently, and actually one of my favorite shows just ever in general. Very well done. If you haven't watched that, please go do yourself a favor and do that. So, if you remember from last time, which was about 3 weeks ago, we were going to be reviewing The Usual Suspects from 1995. As you can tell, I'm already, a bit of a fan of this movie because I have the promotional poster command stripped to my wall. So if you haven't guessed, I like this movie, but let's talk about it. It's directed by Bryan Singer. If you've heard his name recently, it's because he's actually most well known for his work with the X-Men franchise. He directed X-Men and X2 in the early 2000s, dropped out for X3, which was directed by Brett Ratner, X-Men Origins Wolverine, which is an atrocity we never talk about, and he was not present for the kind of franchise reboot of X-Men First Class in 2011, directed by Kingsman director Matthew Vaughn, and then he returned to direct Days of Future Past and Apocalypse, both of which, I haven't seen Apocalypse. I've seen Days of Future Past many times, and it's one of my favorite superhero movies. So I like Bryan Singer as a director, and I actually didn't know that he did this movie until quite recently, and it's written by Christopher McQuarrie, who is currently known for his work in the Mission Impossible franchise. So, the stars of this film: Kevin Spacey, who he's now on House of Cards and done all this other stuff, he's a great actor. Chaz Palminteri, Gabriel Byrne, Pete Postlethwaite, I don't know how to pronounce that guy's name. And if you want to know everyone else, you also have Stephen Baldwin, Benicio del Toro, Kevin Pollak are in this movie as well. And they are all very good actors, and they all do a great job in this movie. So, if you haven't heard of The Usual Suspects, what is it about? Why is this movie good? Why should you see this movie? Well, it tells the story of a man named Verbal Kint, who is played by Kevin Spacey. He is a cripple. He can not really use the left side of his body, I believe, so he walks with a limp and has to hold his arm. He is the sole survivor of a heist that goes terribly wrong and ends in a shootout on a boat where everyone dies. He's the only one that survives. He then recounts this really twisty series of events to a man named Agent David Kuyan, who's played by Chaz Palminteri, and he tells him, the things that happened, the things that transpired that lead to this shootout on the boat. So the first thing I want to talk about are the performances in this movie. This could be considered Kevin Spacey's best performance ever. Now, he won an Oscar for this for Best Supporting Actor, even though he really is the star. It's quite an ensemble cast, so it's kind of hard to pick out a main character, although if I had to, I would say that it's Verbal. I'm not sure if this is his best performance. I think it might just barely be below his performance in Seven, which was directed by David Fincher, and actually the next review that we were doing on this channel. But everyone does a really good job in this movie. Chaz Palminteri is very convincing. Gabriel Byrne does a great job as this kind of reluctant criminal. He goes straight, but then he's, kind of dragged back into it. He does an awesome job. I really liked him in this movie. Benicio del Toro as Fenster was very funny in his, impenetrable dialect. You have no idea what he's saying for the entirety of this movie, but it works. All the characters are very good, and you should, see it because of that. I don't know. One other thing that I wanted to talk about this earlier is the style of storytelling presented in The Usual Suspects. As I just said, the story is told by Verbal Kint about the events that led from this police lineup, which you see there, to the shootout on the boat and Verbal's interrogation by the police. That is what he's doing. He is telling the events that lead up to that. So, everything is told kind of narrated. There's some narration by Verbal. Kevin Spacey does a great job with the narration. He's really kind of deadpan, cynical character talking about what happened, especially early on in the film. He does a really good job with that, and then it kind of goes away and the narrative gets more streamlined near the second half of the movie. But the style of storytelling is a semi-narrated flashback. And I think it works really well in this movie. There are some films that do this. I think that this is the one that does it the best. Because you have this, timeline leading up to this and going back from there, and then the end of the film, it moves on from where it started, if that makes sense. Now, one more thing before we get into what I think is the most important part of this movie, and also the one thing that I can't really talk about, is the pacing in this film is actually excellent. It was surprisingly good. That's one thing that I didn't really remember, because there are certain scenes in this film that stick out way more than the rest of it, so I didn't really remember a whole lot. I hadn't seen this film in a few years, and I just rewatched it all the way through last night, and it was fantastic. I forgot how much I liked it. It is a relatively short runtime. The movie's only an hour and 47 minutes, and it just keeps moving. There's not really any break in the action. It doesn't lull in the middle like some other movies coming out today and even coming out back then do. It's just very consistent in its pacing and its tone and in its quality. It's all very good. Now, this is where reviewing a film like The Usual Suspects gets tricky, is the ending. I can't talk about it. I can't really talk about a lot of the events that go down in this film. If you are familiar with The Usual Suspects, if you've seen it, or if you've heard of it, and if you know how it ends, you know how difficult this might be to review. It is considered by many, including myself, to be the greatest ending in the history of film. It blew me away, and still does. But I can't really talk about it, so see the movie for yourself, make up your own opinion on it, and react, for the first time for yourself, because if you don't know what you're getting into, then you will love this movie. If you know the ending, if you've seen the movie, or if you just know how it ends, watch it again, because it is still so impressive, the level of storytelling that Christopher McQuarrie is exhibiting with his script. It's fantastic. It is very, very well done, so if you haven't picked up on it, I really enjoyed this film. But now, let's see what Leonard has to say about it. Let's see what Lenny's got to say about The Usual Suspects. Okay, he gives it 2.5 stars out of 4, so not exactly favorable. It's, better than 50%, but it's not exactly a good rating. Let's see. 5 criminals of slightly different stripes are busted and put in the police lineup for a crime they didn't commit. They soon discover that fate, and perhaps more earthly forces, brought them together. Terrific cast makes the most of Christopher McQuarrie's intriguing Oscar-winning but convoluted script. Highly praised, but to our minds too clever for its own good. Spacey won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Now, there is a part of that review that I left out, and it is kind of hinting at the ending, which is something that I don't want to do. I don't want to talk about the ending, other than the fact that it's wonderful and you should see this movie. I think his review doesn't really match up with his score. I think that was more of a 3-star review, and he only gives it 2.5. So, I don't know, he sounds like he likes it more than he's saying he does, or maybe he likes it much less than he's giving off. I can't really be sure, but their score doesn't exactly match up with the review itself. That being said, some of the things that he says in there I agree with. I think that the cast is excellent, and I think that they do a great job with McQuarrie's script. One thing that no one actually really mentioned about this movie is the music. I thought the music was very good. It was very tense, building a lot of tension. It is tense and building a lot of tension. That was one of the most redundant things I've ever said on here. But it's true. The music is fantastic, and I don't think that there's really any credit given to the composer, who I sadly don't know. I don't know who the composer was, but very good movie, very effective in the musical composition and the scenes in the film. So, one thing I'm going to say about this movie is that it kind of requires a second viewing after you watch it. You most likely will be confused by the film's conclusion. You might not like the way it ended, and I'm telling you right now, watch it again, because you will have a much greater appreciation for it once you see it a second time. The first time I saw The Usual Suspects all the way through, I knew the ending. So it didn't really come as a surprise, so I was able to appreciate all of the little subtleties hidden throughout the film that hint toward it, for myself upon my first viewing, so I loved it immediately. There are some people that might not understand the ending, they might be confused by the film, and In certain ways, it is confusing, especially with the end. For the most part, it's pretty straightforward crime drama all the way through, with some cool symbolism involving the character of Kaiser Soze, who you've probably heard of at least once in your life. Heard of the character Kaiser Soze. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. That's a quote about Kaiser Soze in this movie, and it's one of my favorite movie quotes ever. It's fantastic and used perfectly right there. Saying that it's confusing does not mean that it's confusing like a movie such as Donnie Darko, or Memento, or Mulholland Drive, or, basically anything that David Lynch has ever put his hands on. It's confusing in the fact that it makes you rethink everything you just watched. It changes your perspective. Not all the way through you're confused, and then by the time it ends you just say, what did I just watch? What is going on? I need to see that again. Or you can do what some other people do and say, that movie was terrible, I never want to think about it again. Which, don't do that, but if you're going to do that, I'm not going to be able to stop you, so go on right ahead. Another thing I want to talk about is Verbal as a narrator. I think he does a very good job. I like movies with narration. I don't know why, I like it. The opening scene to American Psycho is awesome, with Christian Bale narrating that. The opening scene to Goodfellas is a fantastic opening. That's great. Rorschach and Watchmen, which I'm a pretty big fan of. I've read the graphic novel, own the director's cut on Blu-ray, which I've watched 3 times, and have a poster on the other side of that door. That has cool narration. Fight Club, another one of my favorite movies, has narration. Usual Suspect has narration. I like movies with good narration, but you need a good narrator to make that work, and Verbal is fantastic. He is what is known as an unreliable narrator. I actually learned this in English class. I found this whole unit very interesting, talking about different narrators and how they're used in fiction. And Verbal as an unreliable narrator, he is telling the story, but in most cases of literature, first-person literature, with an unreliable narrator, they're trying to convince the audience to sympathize with them or side with them on issues or conflict within the plot. Verbal is not doing that per se, because he's not breaking the fourth wall and narrating directly to the audience, but you never know if he could be maybe twisting his words to gain sympathy from Agent Kuyan. That being said, Kuyan's a pretty tough cop and isn't really buying any of it, but, it's still an interesting dynamic to see play out on screen. So, in conclusion, is The Usual Suspect a good film? Absolutely. It is fantastic. Highly recommend that you see it. It is one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite crime movies, and it is most certainly deserving of its placement here on the IMDb. Top 50 greatest films of all time? Heck, I might even put it higher, because I like it that much. So, as I said earlier in this review, next week we will be reviewing another Kevin Spacey legendary performance in David Fincher's Seven. I have not seen that in well over a year, so I'm going to have to watch that soon. Who knows? Maybe I'll watch it tonight. I don't even know. But I hope that you guys are looking forward to that, and I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please remember to like this video and, do all that fancy stuff. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next review. Thank you for watching. I need an outro. 13 minutes. Good stuff.